What's up, Navigating Academia family? This is Dr. J. Phoenix Singh coming at you to be able to present you with what I believe to be the top 5 biggest red flags that target graduate school supervisors see on graduate school applications. Yes, that's right. Grad school application season is here. October, November, December. These are the 3 most grueling months for anybody who's applying to graduate school. Acceptance rates for most programs are at an all-time low. This is an absolutely critical period for you to be sharpening up all of your materials, from your CV or your resume to your personal statements. Sometimes these days, diversity statements. Some of you guys are retaking standardized tests like the GRE or the GMAT or the MCAT or you name it. There are so many individuals out there all gunning for the exact same positions. This is one of the reasons why, for me, this is one of the busiest times of the year. My job is to be able to help you guys get into the graduate school of your choice. And this is the busiest time of the year for me because so many of you guys I have the pleasure of working with to be able to optimize your personal statements, your diversity statements, getting your CVs looking absolutely perfect. This is the best time of the year, whether you're applying right now or whether you're going to be applying in the next cycle, to be able to begin that process of getting that coaching so we can get you where you need to be. So the website below is where you can contact me to be able to set up a session. Really, guys, now is the time to be able to do it if you've ever thought about booking a coaching session so that we can actually maximize your chances, because shit is crazy out here, if you guys know what I'm saying. So let's go ahead and get on with it, though. So what do I think are the top 5 biggest red flags in your application materials that I want you to avoid when it comes to actually having a graduate supervisor look at everything, and we don't want them to come away with an impression that, oh, wait a second, there's something going on here, and I don't really know what it is. So what are the 5 things that are going to kind of trigger that reaction in a target graduate school supervisor? So I've come up with 5 for you. The first one is an unexplained low or dramatic shift in your GPA, in your grade point average. I've seen this so many times, guys. Oftentimes, you guys will send me your transcripts, which is awesome. And the reason that I like looking at transcripts is to be able to take a look at the cumulative GPA, your major GPA, and then also any trends. So usually what I end up finding is that there's kinds of 3 types of applicants. The first type of applicant, like for me, for example, I'm in psych, and oftentimes I work with people who specifically want to get into clinical psych PhD programs or want to get into clinical psych PsyD programs. So when I take a look at their transcripts, oftentimes I'm used to seeing folks who either, number one, they always were a psych major, and from first semester, first year, they were taking psych classes, and this continued all the way through their senior year. Okay, that's typology number 1. Typology number 2 is essentially somebody who graduated with a degree in something completely different, like political science, for example, and then all of a sudden they're applying for a grad school degree, a doctorate, let's say, in clinical psychology, and we'll get more to that when I talk about red flag number 2. But that's the second typology. The third typology is what I'm talking about here, though, in the first red flag, which is basically a scenario where you're looking at the transcript, and for the first 2 years, you see everything that would maybe have to do with pre-law, for example. A lot of political science classes, maybe even some econ courses, for instance. And all of a sudden, everything shifts. And all of a sudden, it's all psych classes. Or everything was organic chemistry and physics and all of these things, bio, stuff that you would expect to see in somebody who is pre-med. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, at the end of junior year, bam, 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 second semester, junior year, and beyond, everything, like 100%, is psych classes. Clearly something happened there. There was this dramatic shift. But if that's in the transcripts and you don't actually mention that anywhere else in your application materials, the 2 places to do that obviously would be in your personal statement in paragraph 2. So I have a 5-paragraph strategy that I work with in terms of anybody who wants to do consultation with me, where those of you who've done it with me, you know that I go through sentence by sentence, literally in every paragraph, and tell you exactly what you need to put in there, as well as the flow of the personal statement. People are not great at writing personal statements, especially for grad school, and so that's something that I really specialize in because I've done this many hundreds of times, so I know everything to avoid and everything we want to do, all the terminology, the flow, all that kind of stuff. So if you want to work with me on it, it would be a pleasure. So that's the idea, right? Is that in paragraph 2, which is where we talk about academic related things, obviously this gives you the opportunity to, in a narrative fashion, explain why this was going on your transcripts, right? Because it's going to bring up, trust me, a big question mark. And usually it's something where there was nothing that went like totally haywire, nothing went wrong. It's just something that there's a story behind it, oftentimes a good story, right? Insofar as you discovered this deep love of psychology. It's not something where you were like, I tried to do pre-med, but it was too hard. And so because of that, I decided on psychology instead. No, rarely, if ever, is it that. And if it is that, don't say that. You and I need to come up with a story that essentially is going to pivot away from that, okay? So that's the idea there. So those are the 3 big typologies. And if you happen to fall into the second or the third typology, you need to discuss that somewhere. So it can be in the personal statement, or it can be in one of the letters of recommendation. Again, those of you who work with me, you know that we basically use this 3-part strategy in terms of letters of recommendation. We have 3 very specific types of individuals who focus on representing very specific types of yourself, and this is going to fit in basically with the individual who's going to talk about you from an academic stance. Okay, so that's red flag number 1. Now, red flag number 2, right, is an unexplained disparity, so an unexplained difference between your major and your graduate degree area, okay? And again, unexplained. So I mentioned it a moment ago that there's that secondary typology, which is basically somebody who gets a degree in econ, or a degree in poli-sci, or a degree in something even adjacent to, for me, psychology, right? So sociology, anthropology, and then all of a sudden they're applying for a clinical psych PhD. And when I take a look, maybe, let's say, at their CV, and I look through, they don't seem to even have any coursework. If I look at the transcripts and we look at the CV, there's really no engagement in their job. Let's say maybe they were a staffer. I live in DC, right? Maybe they were a staffer on, at Congress, right? On the Hill, as we say, Capitol Hill. Well, if that's the case, fantastic, cool job. But how on earth did you get from being a staffer for a great senator from Rhode Island, and all of a sudden now you're applying for a clinical psych PhD, and there's no narrative around that, right? You haven't explained it. That's a problem, right? That's not something that is going to sufficiently intrigue people. Yes, trying to get some intrigue is a fantastic idea. There's some fascinating studies that were done at MIT actually about MIT about dating in the linguistics lab, and what they found is that the number 1 predictor about whether or not somebody will go on a second date with you is not whether they're attracted to you, but it's whether they're intrigued by you, okay? So I want you to be intriguing in your materials, and there's very specific ways to do that. For example, in your personal statement, what I teach people if you work with me is there's a very specific way to be able to hook people in sentence number 1, and I give you, of course, tons of examples of that. But that's the thing, right, is you gotta be intriguing. It's absolutely critical, okay? That's red flag number 2. If you don't explain that anywhere, where did that shift come from? That's gonna be a problem, okay? So, red flag number 3 is letters of recommendation from non-major professors. For example, you're applying for a clinical psych PhD program, and you've got a French professor writing your letter, right? Or you've got an individual who, let's say, is maybe one of your big extracurriculars was dance, right? I had a lot of friends big into dance. It's an extracurricular. Or maybe you had a minor in dance, and one of your professors, you had them for 6 classes, and they always knew, and they knew how hardworking you were in these things, but you have a dance professor writing your letter of recommendation, okay, from that academic perspective. That's not a good idea, okay? Especially if it's something where the professor is a non-advisor. That's something always that lifts an eyebrow for me. If I'm taking a look at an applicant and I end up seeing that they have an academic reference from somebody who was not their undergraduate advisor, it makes me wonder why their undergraduate advisor was not selected. This is something that is a bit of a red flag for me, because it suggests that the person who should know you best wasn't selected. So then it's kind of like, what would they say, right? They were kind of the ones in charge of kind of guiding you, and they should have been somebody, usually, who is actually in the relevant department, and usually you end up selecting the person. So why on earth wasn't that the person, right, who's writing your letter of recommendation that focuses on you academically? So that's a red flag for me. Or it's also a red flag if a letter comes from somebody totally extraneous. So for example, I knew somebody once who she'd been an au pair overseas, and she wanted the mother in the family who was in a totally different field and had a different profession. I think she was an engineer. Write her a letter of recommendation for a clinical psych program. Why? Because she said, well, she knows me so well as a person and knows that I'm very caring and these things. That's an extraneous person. It's also a bad idea if you know somebody but not very well. Maybe it's a family friend, and maybe they're like a really famous person, like here in the US, like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or one of these types of people, right? It's like, well, they're a family friend and they can write me a letter and that's going to make me seem really fancy. Or like I'm in psych, so it's like, oh, the family friend is Aaron Beck or Martin Seligman or one of these people, they can write a letter, but they don't really know you that well. The letter is not going to be good. I'm just telling you right now. And I would really avoid that strategy of having somebody really extraneous writing on your behalf, okay? So that is red flag number 3. Red flag number 4 is a personal statement that mentions multiple prospective graduate supervisors, especially if you're applying for a research-based degree. For example, in my field of psych, this would be the case for clinical psych PhD. Epic mistake to be able to say, well, I'm interested in Professor X's work in substance abuse, and also deeply passionate about Professor Y's work in schizophrenia, and Professor Z has got some really cool stuff when it comes to emotion dysregulation that I may want to get involved with as well. His lab seems pretty cool. This is a terrible idea. Now, why is that? Imagine me, right? So let's say Daria's my girlfriend, if you guys don't know. So let's say that Daria is in a nightclub, right? And I've never met Daria before, right? And it's Daria and like 2 other girls, and there's a guy who wants to go up and hit on Daria, right? If he goes up or whatever and it's like, wow, you look beautiful tonight, you look fantastic, da da da, right? Okay, then maybe she would talk to him, right? But let's say that he ends up walking up and he looks at all 3 of the girls and he's like, hey, ladies, all 3 of you are equally beautiful. This makes none of them feel very beautiful. This is the exact same idea, ironically, right? Is that if you have somebody applying to work with you as a student, right, and you read it, it's like, okay, I was listed 3rd, so I'm not interested. And then the second person would say, well, I'm listed in the middle here. The person's interested in other folks. And then the person who's mentioned first, which is probably the person you're most interested in, is going to be like, this person hasn't put any thought into this, right? And it's really unclear why they want to work with me, right? Because you've used the rest of these sentences in that paragraph, which is supposed to be designed, usually 1 paragraph at least, if not 2, is designed to be able to talk about your goodness of fit with the supervisor and or the program. If that is the case, this is really bad. There are some prompts which say something like, who are the 2, potential grad school supervisors who you would like to be considered for, or, whose work in the department are you passionate about following, or something like that. If that's the case, here's what you're going to do. You're going to spend the entire flippin' paragraph focused on one of their work, and then you're going to mention at the very end in one sentence, the work of Professor, Johnson on substance abuse is also fascinating to me, period. That means that Professor Johnson will never take you as a student, but that wasn't the point. You want to spend all of your time talking about the first supervisor, not the second one, okay? It is a very bad idea to mention several supervisors in that paragraph, okay? It's an epic red flag. If I ever see that for myself, reject immediately, okay? And then finally, the last red flag that I've got for you guys today is a clear lack of understanding of what a career will be like in your field, right? Just a lack of understanding, right? So for example, in psych, trust me on this one, I was as guilty as everybody else on this, so I'm not judging, right? But in my field, something about, I'm so passionate about helping other people, you may write down, or like I realized my dream or whatever of being able to serve my community. These are honorable, noble, fantastic things, but it is also incredibly cliche, right? And professors usually have read so many hundreds, if not thousands of applications by the point that they're actually going to be looking at your materials, that the idea that they're going to look at them and be like, oh, wow, this person wants to help people. It's like, yeah, I hope so. You're applying for a behavioral health graduate program. Everybody wants to help people, right? It just doesn't make us unique, right? And so that's the thing. If you say something like, I want to help people, or, I'm very passionate about research, which is great, but so is everybody else. So you can't quite say it like that. Or I'm very passionate about, teaching and I want to be a professor. Again, fantastic. But one of the things that I see in psych, for example, is people having no understanding that no, you are not going to be a full-time clinician and a full-time professor and do research full-time. and you're not going to do 33%, 33%, 33%, and you're not going to do 50-50. No, it's just not going to happen, guys, because that means that if you do 50-50, you're going to do both poorly, right? Usually it's something where you're doing a little bit of research because you want to stay engaged, and at the same time you've got a private practice, or you do a little bit of private practice on the side, but only like a couple of clients, and then, you do full-time research like on top, other than that, or you love to teach, and so you've got your private practice, and then you do 1 or 2 adjunct classes at night, and you guys know as well as I do that adjuncting pays nothing, right? We've got videos on the channel which talks about how poorly most adjuncts are paid, and how over 80% of all new positions are not tenure track, but rather adjunct in nature. So this is really rough, right? But those are the 5 big red flags that I see. Usually when I take a look at people's applications, there's a lot more stuff that needs to be shifted around to be able to polish up the materials. Oftentimes people think their materials are perfect until I look at them, and then they're like, oh, I didn't realize it, but that actually does end up making it better, right? So I highly recommend booking a session with me. Again, you can do that via the website below. Looking forward to hopefully speaking with so many of you guys soon, and good luck this application season.